This is My First Job in Sports web series, presented by SBRnet, your comprehensive source of sports data to the academic community. Here are the hosts of My First Job in Sports, Neil Schwartz and Mark Sullivan.
Welcome to My First Job in Sports, presented by SBRnet, together with our friends from the Sports and Fitness Industry Association. Here at My First Job in Sports, we like to talk about providing inspiration, motivation, and even some navigation to college students that are currently, in sports marketing or sports business or related categories to help them get that all first job in sports. But before we kick it over to Mark and talk a little bit about today's guest, I want to congratulate Mark for finally honoring the SBRnet dress code and wearing his official SBRnet shirt. Way to go, Mark.
Yes, there we go. Neil and I matching for the first time. And there's a reason, Neil, that today is the big day that I finally wore our matching shirts, because our guest today, Lucie Kloak from my hometown of Ridgewood, New Jersey, got her start in the fashion business. So this is an honor of Lucie. Lucie, welcome to the program.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So I've been telling everyone all about Lucie, so I said expectations are extremely high for her appearance on the show. And Lucie, I really want to start out talking about your high school athletic career and how that led you to college. I think it's such an extraordinary story that it's worth talking about. So you were a high school hockey player, right?
Yep. So I was a high school hockey player all growing up. I was hoping to go to college for women's ice hockey. I was exploring every opportunity through that, and I was hopefully on the path to do so. My junior year rolled around, and I was looking for something to keep me in shape in the off season, since I had been so hyper-focused on hockey kind of through fall, winter, and spring. It's kind of a year-round sport. And one of my friends asked me to come to her rowing practice, crew team practice, said it was a great workout on the erg, on the water. I told her I'd check it out, and, went to one turned into two turned into five. And, I figured out very quickly I had a knack for rowing, which I'm a tall, athletically built woman. I'm 6'2", and wow. I'm a, hockey player. So it kind of came naturally to me, knock on wood. So I was very fortunate, and that ultimately led me to commit for a scholarship to row Division I crew at UNC Chapel Hill.
Did you row eights, fours, twos, or singles?
So it was interesting. I started off in a single because I was late to the game. So it definitely capsized a lot in the Hudson River, which very quickly you learn not to do that in the Hudson River. And then I ultimately grew to a 4, and then all through college I was in an 8.
So you actually got a D1 scholarship to UNC without ever really being sort of a high school rower, correct?
Correct, yeah. I guess technically my high school rowing career spanned about 3 months. Wow. And I was recruited. Rowing and crew is a very interesting sport to get recruited for. And at least my experience was very unique, I think, compared. So a lot of people that I had rowed with in college, had been rowing since they were in like 6th, 7th grade. Mm-hmm. They've definitely cultivated the craft, but at some certain point, at least in my perspective, a raw power was a huge asset that I had. I mean, how they lay out a boat, just to give you guys a quick snippet, is more so the front of the boat. Usually, since you're watching everyone in front of you, have the best technique. And then the back of the boat, the end of the boat, is kind of the people who guide the coxswains for direction if you're going around turns in a river. And then the middle of the boat is usually the power. They kind of lift the boat up almost. And that was, I was a 5 seat. I literally sat smack in the middle of that boat. And, for my high school career, I shut my eyes and I pulled as hard as I could for 8 minutes. So it was an interesting and a unique, experience for me, but I wouldn't change it. And college, all I did was learn more so, how to row, strategy behind it and kind of perfecting my technique. But I was really fortunate. So.
All right. So, but then let's come back to hockey. So you resumed your hockey career at UNC. Tell us that story.
Yeah. So when I was a rower at UNC, as you guys know, my posture and form certainly took a deep dive as I learned, to navigate that world. So I blew out my shoulder for middle of my junior year. Definitely on track, more of like a nerve pinching situation, but they recommended that, I stopped rowing just for more of like life purposes, right? Being able to use my shoulder and everything. So from there, I was bummed that happened to me, but then I, was fortunate enough that I joined our club men's ice hockey team, which didn't impact my shoulder, which was great. It was contact, which I wasn't used to since women's hockey it's not non-contact.
No check.
So that was an adjustment, but definitely, wasn't super, super intense league, but, we had some really great players. We ended up winning a club ACC championship. And I wouldn't trade that experience either. So I was on the hockey team for my senior year at Carolina.
All right. So I have to ask you, Lucie, I've seen this. Are you wearing your club championship ring today?
I do have it. If you
All
give
right.
me 1 second, it's right here. I'll have to show you guys.
All right.
Okay, this is the first guest that we've had that we've pushed off camera, Mark.
Yes, right. Wow. Very impressive. Very impressive.
I'm not walking around wearing it everywhere, but it was a really cool thing that I think, these are the rings that, the basketball team gets. It's a club championship. Not to downplay, but it was something that I'll keep forever. Hopefully I can give it to my kids one day. So
well, I've seen it and it's a beautiful ring. So thank you for showing it to us. And
Lucie,
thanks for sharing that story.
Let's get back to kind of our focus, which is, of course, my first job in sports. And, what we like our guests to do is to give us a little bit of their kind of history, through school and then through that first few jobs. So take it away.
Yeah, so at Carolina, as you guys know from my past and my family, we're a super active family, which obviously transitioned into our athletic careers. I had always been interested in sports from a personal level, but also watching level. I wouldn't say, and I'm not here to fake it, I wouldn't say I am like an advocate at every game, distinctly watching everything, but I do enjoy it. I think I went to a big school that really emphasized the importance of community and sports, and that really, drew my interest into the world outside of actually playing a sport. So from there, I kind of explored, when I was picking a major and thinking about where my strengths are, I was really, really interested in the journalism school at UNC. So the journalism school, which is now renamed the Hussman School, Stuart Scott went through there, Michael Jordan went through there, John Skipper from ESPN went through there. So a lot of big names in the sports industry kind of, trajectory through the journalism school. So that was really where I focused. I wanted to dive into. And I think at school, they did a great job of not only, giving us the ins and outs of the sports industry, but really gave us a whole big, picture about the back end of sports, right? The business side of things and how the operations and things ran. And that really sparked my interest. As you guys know, I'm a talker. I'm very chatty.
No.
So I also wanted to kind of jump onto that, capitalize on that skill that I have and, not so much from a broadcasting side, but more of like, how can I get involved in sports and the marketing side of things while also, capitalizing on the fact that I love to talk to people. So that is kind of how it stemmed. And then from there, I was really fortunate enough to come back to New York City, right outside of Ridgewood, where I'm from, and have 2 amazing internships that also just expedited my process of why I loved sports. I interned at PVH, which is known as Philip Van Heusen. They are the parent company of a couple apparel brands. They own Calvin Klein, Tommy Hilfiger, and then where I focused was they also own smaller brands, Speedo,
Yes.
Izod, Van Heusen, which, as you guys know, are more of athleisure brands, right? Speedo really focuses on the Olympics and the swimming. Izod has a big presence in golf. And Van Heusen is doing a great job of, making men wear that people who have athletic builds or want a little more flex to them. So that was kind of my focus when I was there, was helping to market those specific 3 brands in a way, whether it be through sponsoring an athlete, making sure that they are locked and loaded on the podium and the branding is right out front and center. So that was an amazing experience, which segued into then my next internship was Sony Music, which wasn't sports related, but it was entertainment focused, which I also loved and gave me a whole new perspective on the marketing world, just from an entertainment side of things, right? So how it more, how all this kind of encompasses one thing. Sports correlate to entertainment, right? You're watching sports on TV, you're watching your favorite athlete at the ESPYs, you're listening to their podcasts. So that was a great perspective, which then once I graduated, I knew I wanted to come back to New York if I was lucky enough to get a job and, possibly either work at one of the companies that I interned with. Through there, I made great connections, stayed in touch, which we can dive into, which I know is huge. And then, ultimately, landed a job at Viacom, which, as you guys know, is a massive network. And there I kind of focused for 6 months on the Nick Sports channel, right? So then there's Nickelodeon, there's Nicktoons, there's Teen Nick, and then there was a Nick Sports channel, which really was focused on, helping young kids get involved and get out and just get active, which I love too, because it didn't necessarily focus on the World Cup or the Stanley Cup. It focused more on like, hey, did you get outside for 20 minutes a day and kick the soccer ball around? So loved that messaging, worked on their social media side for 6 months. And then while I was doing that, I was looking for a full-time role since that was a little more contract-based. And from there, I actually got a job on the same team that I interned for at PVH, helping with their sponsorships and endorsements. Wow. So that was exciting.
That's a great path. Could you talk a little bit about how you got the internship, particularly at PVH, and then how you sort of reconnected with them and parlayed that into a full-time job?
Yes.
Yeah. So my internship was super crucial at PVH. I can't emphasize that enough. I was really lucky enough to, know someone who had worked on actually the IT side of PVH. So really nothing that I wanted to go into per se, or was what my focus was, but was a really great, mentor to me to kind of help me point me in the right direction and get me kind of in front of the right people per se, or even, just crack the door open so I can, kind of open those floodgates. So from there, PVH has an internship program, which they do globally since they have a couple offices. So the New York one is about 10 to 15 interns. And each department, if on a need basis, gets an intern. You get preference on what, departments you would like to be in, but usually, it's where they really need help. So I was really lucky enough to intern for the first 3 weeks on the investment relations side, which I liked.
IR is interesting.
It's very interesting. Yep. So that was definitely a little more analytical based, a little more financial based. Great experience there. And then for the other 3 weeks, I moved over to the sports and marketing side.
Probably gave you a nice wide view of things in the financial side, didn't it? I would think.
Totally. I mean, even from the back end of it all the way to the front end of how they make money and then how we spend money was super interesting to me. And I truly think, my internships were unbelievable. I had unbelievable mentors at both. But I really got to wear a lot of hats and kind of help where I was needed, which now, being 5 years out of undergrad and in the working world, just gave me a bigger picture on, a company and kind of how they run. So I loved it.
I want to go back to a couple of things that you talked about, but before that, tell us about, where you are now, what you're doing, and all of the things that, kind of have gone into that.
Yeah, so right now I work for DraftKings. As you guys know, it's the sports betting and daily fantasy space. I've been there for 3 years. I actually recently just switched roles to a different team at DraftKings, which I can dive into. But for the first 3 years when I got hired, I was an integrated marketing team member. So what that means is DraftKings is an app and a website, as you guys know. You can go on, you can play games, you can bet. What we call them are contests and games. So if you went on right now and you wanted to play against the Mets versus the Yankees, they will have 7 different games that you could play. Bet $5, bet $3, do it for free, and you can put some money on the game. That's kind of the bread and butter of DraftKings. So my goal, my team's goal, was to help bring in brand partners like a Bud Light or an Anheuser-Busch or a Buffalo Wild Wings and either sponsor those games or build them out a marketing package that kind of encompasses their ownership of these games, these contests. And that can range from, Buffalo Wild Wings, you're going to sponsor every Thursday night on DraftKings throughout the NFL season, right? So if you go on Thursday nights, you want to play Pats versus Giants, it's thanks so much for playing in our game. Head to Buffalo Wild Wings for $5 off your next set of wings. So I kind of have helped integrate different brands into DraftKings and we've in the last 3 years, found the white spaces of the advertising and marketing world in the betting and sports gambling space and kind of brought in brands in through there.
Right now there's really no hotter space than the one you're in, Lucie. SBRnet, our primary goal is that we provide data to universities and colleges and, of course, our non-academic clients. And one of the areas that we focus in is sports gambling. In fact, I recently did a presentation at one of the sports conferences regarding sports gambling, fantasy sports, and then all the things. So, right now you are in a place that is probably like a beehive of activity.
Yeah. So it's definitely ramped up over the last, I would say, 2.5 years. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to lie. When I first explored DraftKings, when I was moving roles, a lot of people around me were hesitant to jump on board. I think this is an industry that has really kind of taken off in the last, like I said, 2 years. Mm-hmm. And it's really becoming more casual-fied, I guess you could say. My mom, who's not a big sports girl, knows exactly what DraftKings is, all the way to, to the really niche sports gambler. And I think DraftKings has done a great job of getting themselves out there, helping to educate people and not have them shy away from this industry, which I love to be a part of. I think, as it evolves and changes, it's really an ever-changing door. It's totally, and I think as we all know and watch sports and are interested in sports, even from, 5-10 years ago, the world around sports has shifted.
Yes.
And it's exciting to be a part of. It really is.
Well, it's certainly becoming much more mainstream. And like you said, I think sports gambling had that sort of once upon a time sort of almost unseemly aspect to it, but no more. And also, it's so interesting to hear you talk about integration, because we had Scott Kaufman-Ross from the NBA on recently, and he talked about how media companies are getting into sports betting. And what you just described you did at DraftKings, you're a sports betting company that really was running a media model. So I think it's just the environment, the business environment today is so dynamic and so exciting. So tell us about your new role.
Yeah, so DraftKings, as you guys know, the bread and butter of DraftKings, which I just said, is our games and our contests on the site. So as DraftKings grows, as the industry grows, we are starting to fill these white spaces and figure out how we can get involved as a company. So for example, we don't have a strong content arm. That we leave those to the Barstools of the world, Bleacher Reports, who are, big contenders in that space. Yes. And I think, as DraftKings grows, it's something that we want to be a part of in some capacity, whether it be partnering with different, podcasters or content companies or creating our own. So exciting news for DraftKings, but back in March, we acquired a company out in Las Vegas called VSiN, Vegas Stat and Information Network. What those guys do out there is they are an 18-hour-a-day content platform that talk sports. They talk money lines. They talk parlays. They're a little more targeted to that nitty-gritty sports gambler, opposed to the more general podcasts or live streams that you hear about, on iHeartRadio or SiriusXM. So we actually bought that company back in March. My goal as that company grows and evolves with DraftKings is to help bring now brands in on that content arm. So not only am I trying to bring brands in to work with DraftKings, but I'm like, hey, a little more of like, brands that are targeted more to that Vegas sports betting audience. So a lot of what I focus on, and that's kind of been my challenge over the last couple of weeks, is navigating that world, understanding that world, first of all, and learn and educating myself, navigating that world, and then picking the right brands and partners to really, really get the most for what they're spending with DraftKings and with VSiN. So that's kind of my new role and project, is to kind of focus on this content arm of DraftKings that is VSiN. So it's been exciting. It's been fun. I'm learning a ton. But I think, the space is really, how I describe it is, it's the wild, wild west. There are really no rules.
Totally.
Yes.
And even me, I'll have meetings with my team and, I'm like, well, can we do this? And like, everyone's, well, why not? But, there's no.
Ask the lawyers.
Exactly. Like, is it possible? Sure. Has anyone ever done it? No. Can we? Sure. So a lot of it's exciting because it's so much uncharted territory, but it's also very daunting, right? A brand who has, traditionally been very successful, and wants to know exactly every detail that goes into these partnership plans. I'm limited in what I know, right? I can't guarantee, that every single person who listens to this podcast is going to go about and, buy a Big Mac from McDonald's if McDonald's runs an ad. But, all I can do is, make sure that, you're tapping into this white space audience. It's a different space that no one's ever touched. I also think a great angle for me when I, as I learn this world is, people and brands and companies are jumping on board in the sports betting space, in my opinion, whether they kind of like it or not. In some
or know about it or not.
Exactly. And I, have really tried to bring brands in that normally wouldn't run on the NFL network because they don't have rights, right? Or, can't afford a Super Bowl ad for 30 seconds because it's, $1 billion. So this is a way for me to integrate brands without feeling like they, one, need to spend $1 million. Second of all, they're hitting the same audience, and third of all, are we hitting your KPIs and what you ultimately want out of these goals? So it's an exciting time for DraftKings specifically, I have to say, but, just kind of navigating the space.
Lucie, right now, we know there's about 22 states that have legalized and are in some form of operational. Either they are operational or they're on their way to operational. And so, this is a really fast growing space. And, I see ads from you, your competitors, and all these different companies that are somehow related to, there's a lot of jobs out there. There's no other way for me to say it. Lucie, what are those skills that college students really need to be focusing on if they want to get a job at DraftKings or any of the sports betting or fantasy sites that are just growing like weeds?
That's a great question. And I wish someone had told me this through college. I think the best thing that you can do as a student or as someone who really wants to maybe shift careers into this space is really just educate yourself. I think an exciting part of DraftKings is that, there really isn't or in the sports betting space in general, let's just say, there really isn't a powerhouse like a Nike in the apparel world, right? That people can look at and say, oh, well, we should follow Nike's model because they've been so successful. I think educating yourself on the sports betting space, because we're all learning together, even my boss, she has been she's been in this marketing world for, 10 plus years more than I have. And she's like, let's learn together because no one knows around you. So I think the more that a student or anyone can educate themselves, not only on the industry, but kind of trying to think outside of the box of where, a DraftKings or a PointsBet or FanDuel can get involved with places that they haven't touched just brings you more value to a company. If you're bringing to them, creative and cool ideas. And, it doesn't always need to be in the marketing world. A lot of who I work with are, analytic guys, engineers, who kind of put on our apps. It's a tech company. At the end of the day, DraftKings is a tech company, as are all of these. They're running platform analytical data, giving you or me the data that we can go make more money.
What are some of the hard skills that maybe you wished you would have acquired, knowing where you are now? I know it's always like, if I knew then what I knew now, I would have taken more, data analytics courses, or I would have, maybe learned how to, gotten my Excel skills, honed and things like that. What are those hard skills?
Yeah. So I think, through school, being involved in projects that, a little more entrepreneurship based, opposed to, reading a textbook, memorizing a textbook, going to take a test. So I think, I wish I had kind of been a little more creative and thought on my feet in certain classes, when the easy route is to just, like I said, copy paste, memorize a textbook, move on, take your test, get an A, move on. I wish it was and there are options. There are always options at schools. I wish I'd taken advantage a little more of those courses that were a little more creative based or entrepreneurial driven, because I think anyone can, go to a company and get in their corporate ladder and just kind of do their job. But I think the biggest component that sets people or candidates out looking for new jobs is bringing something that I wouldn't normally would have think of.
Sure.
So that's what I definitely think. And I have to say, as someone who, I think anyone who's even listening to this podcast or, involved in sports can say that they're a sports fan. Getting yourself familiarized with the product is huge. You can't get someone else, whether it be a consumer, a business, a brand, excited about your product if you yourself are not excited and pumped up about it. So for me, a lot of this last year has been really trying to get on DraftKings and play. I mean, I'm just trying to be a consumer. What would a consumer want, So I think that's huge.
Yeah, I think you make a couple excellent points there, and it echoes what some of our other guests have said, exactly. Where, every person listening to this podcast is probably like, I love sports, I want to work in sports. Well, that's not necessarily a job requirement, but if you say I have analytical skills or entrepreneurial skills, or I built my own handbag business, and I think that's all the sort of thing that translates, and those are the sort of things, quite honestly, that employers are looking for.
Lucie, Mark and I really want to thank you for coming on My First Job in Sports. You are enthusiastic, you are passionate. I think that our viewers, as well as our listeners and college students, can really learn a lot from what you brought to the show and what you bring to the table. So, Lucie, first, I definitely want to thank you for coming on My First Job in Sports.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been awesome.
I have one last question now. I always, like to get that one last thing in. If there was one piece of advice, you're standing in front of 30 college seniors at the University of North Carolina, beautiful place, by the way, Chapel Hill, what would you tell them to help them get that all-important first job in sports?
Don't shy away from the light that's inside of you. Focus on that. Capitalize on your skills, whether it be talking in a room, organizational skills. As someone who struggled to find a first job, as many we do, focus on what makes you a great person, and everyone else will see that in you too.
Lucie, that sounds like terrific advice. And I think, Mark, that's kind of a little bit different than what we've heard from a number of our other guests.
No, 100%. And I think it sort of speaks to the essence of who Lucie is and how she's taken who she is and is really building a wonderful career based on that. So, Lucie, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you guys so much for having me. This has been great.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of My First Job in Sports, presented by SBRnet, together with our friends at the Sports and Fitness Industry Association. Don't forget to listen to us on all the major podcast platforms, or go over to our website at www.sbrnet.com, and you can get both the audio and video versions of My First Job in Sports. Thanks again for tuning in.
Thank you for tuning in to this edition of My First Job in Sports, presented by SBRnet. You can check out the video version on the SBRnet Video Corner on YouTube. You can also catch the audio version on all major podcast platforms. Just search for My First Job in Sports. My First Job in Sports is produced by Brad Mabey. You can connect with us on all social media platforms, including Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn, or check us out at sbrnet.com. Thank you for tuning in.